I finally got to spend this weekend playing PlayStation 5 enabled 120 frame per second games on a new LG television that supported 120 frame per second mode. And coming from a place of being a PC gamer and being used to incredibly, ridiculously high frame rates, I really thought I would have a better appreciation or better eye to be able to distinguish between a nice, smooth 60 frame per second experience and a 120 frame per second experience. And I've got to admit, either I'm losing my touch or there's not as big of a difference as I thought. There may be some other factors at play, but I just wanted to talk through this a little bit because I was really kind of adamant for a long time that I was missing out. I really felt like I was missing out on the 120 frame per second gameplay when Call of Duty announced that Warzone was be available at 120 FPS, when Halo Infinite said they were supporting 120 FPS, and a handful of other titles. The titles I tried include Ghostwire Tokyo, Borderlands 3, Dirt 5, and Ghostrunner. These were all games that I enabled the 120 FPS mode on the PlayStation 5 through the television. I was able to confirm, in fact, that I was getting up to a 120 frame per second signal, but it just didn't look that great. Yes, it was smooth. Was it smoother than 60 frames per second? Not really. Not really. I didn't really notice any significant change in how the image looked. Everything still very smooth, very silky, obviously. When you're hitting anything over 60, it looks great. But I didn't see a huge distinction where I was like, wow, that's way smoother. Now, you watch a lot of these videos on Digital Foundry or other video game review sites that get into the technical aspect of things, and you'll see they'll take a split screen of a 60 frame per second image and a 120 frame per second image, and they'll slow them down to a quarter speed or half speed. And you look and you go, wow, the 120 frame per second image, man, oh man, is it beautiful. Your eye doesn't really see that in real time. Obviously, it's half speed, but I didn't notice any big difference. So that was the first thing. Additionally, a lot of TVs, and there may be some out there, I don't know. I know that there's some coming out this year. A lot of TVs don't support a 120 FPS with an OLED kind of wrapper around it. It seems like it's one or the other. I would much rather personally game on a 60 frame per second television with OLED than a 120 without OLED. OLED makes a world of difference in video games, particularly in games like Elden Ring, or in other games where you have a lot of vibrant colors and a lot of dark blacks. And you really start to see something pop. Ghostwire Tokyo, perfect example. I just did a review on that the other day, and I was in love with Ghostwire Tokyo, particularly because of how smooth and how vibrant the particle and the magic effects were against the dark. That was something that really kind of stood out to me. Unfortunately, you know, when you have an LED screen, it doesn't pop the way that an OLED screen does, and that was something that I really noticed. So to me, I think that's a big distinction as well. The biggest thing, though, if you want to kind of throw that one out, because that is, you know, again, that's not an apples to apples comparison. I noticed on online play, the 120 frame per second mode, you really notice character stuttering and not smooth network connections. Now, I wasn't suffering from that problem. The internet down south, it was way better than what I have. You know, significantly high uploads, significantly high download speeds. So it wasn't an issue of what I was kind of broadcasting and receiving. It was all the other players. And you know what I'm talking about when you get those players that have the really bad ping, that are like kind of teleporting around, or they're kind of jerky in their movement. On the 120 frame per second mode, wow, what a radical difference that makes. You really do notice how much more distinct it is, and it pops out. And I think a lot of that has to do with, obviously, the trade-off to get to a 120. You have to lower the game settings even further. So draw distance has to be even lower. Anti-aliasing has to be even lower. fog, particle effects, physics, everything has to be lower because you're trying to up the speed of your current processor. And some games hide this better than others. I think a game like Call of Duty Warzone is not a good example of this because there's a lot of open world areas. Now, when you're inside houses or corridors or hallways, it looks significantly better. But when you're trying to take a sniper shot out in a field, or if you're playing Ghostwire Tokyo and you're up on a tall building and you're gliding down through the cityscape, pop in and the graphic distortion looks way worse. I think the bigger problem too is that it doesn't really reach that 120. And while it still looks smooth, and I can't yet comment on the variable refresh rate support of the PlayStation 5 because it doesn't exist yet, I can say that on my gaming monitor right now using NVIDIA G-Sync, you do get a nice smooth, you don't really notice any of that hookup with the game's yo-yoing very radically over 60 frames per second. You really don't notice it on a G-Sync enabled monitor. I suspect variable refresh rate would be similar. But when you really look at kind of the horsepower of the PlayStation 5 and the way the games are designed, unfortunately, they're still just not quite there. I think the ratio of resolution to draw distance to everything, you can't fine tune it on a PC the way, you know, on a PC you can fine tune it. On a PlayStation, you don't have that support. You're kind of left to what the developers want you to do. And I think that's something that's kind of worth like thinking as well. So I guess as I kind of wrap up this video, it wasn't a negative experience by any stretch of the imagination. It just wasn't really for me. I think there has to be a trade-off when you're gaming. If you're on a console, you don't have much of a choice, right? You have the 30 fidelity and then you have the 60 performance. That's about it. But from a PC universe and kind of the experience I have there, there's always that trade-off of getting better performance at the trade-off of graphical fidelity. And I feel like the tuning right now isn't quite there. You're giving up way too much stuff to reach this mythical 120 when, one, it doesn't even reach 120, and two, I feel like sometimes they're giving up the wrong things. In a game where draw distance and seeing an enemy at distance is so critical, in a game like Warfare, Modern Warzone rather, having that pop in there in a low draw distance, but instead having really good smoke and particle effects nearby your character just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think some of those trade-offs are there. It'll be very interesting to see as this generation develops, as we know that consoles will eventually get a little bit more robust. Game coding will get better. Unreal Engine 5 should be able to push better technology. It's a more optimized engine. You should get more lifelike imagery. It'll be interesting to see as things evolve over the next few years and as we develop more into the console life cycle, as games just naturally look better, if this is something that can be fixed. But as of right now, I don't really think you're missing out too much. If you're somebody that games on a 120 hertz display, leave a comment below and let me know if I'm totally missing something. But to me, I think 60 frames per second on an OLED, honestly, you'll be very, very content with that experience. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.